Captain Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the transport ship's viewing deck, watching Earth grow larger through the reinforced glass. After 8 years fighting in the Outer Ring Wars against the Zeltharan Empire, she was finally going home. The blue marble looked exactly as she remembered from her childhood, but Sarah felt like a completely different person. At 26, she had seen more death and destruction than most people could imagine. Her body was covered in scars from plasma burns and shrapnel wounds. Her left arm was cybernetic, a replacement for the one she lost during the Battle of Proxima Station. The military doctors said she was lucky to be alive, but sometimes Sarah wondered if lucky was the right word. "Attention passengers, we will be docking at Luna Station in 30 minutes, the ship's AI announced. Sarah gathered her single duffel bag, which contained everything she owned. 8 years of war had taught her that possessions were just things that could be lost or destroyed. The other passengers on the transport were mostly civilians returning from mining operations or diplomatic missions. They gave Sarah nervous looks, probably because of her military bearing and the visible scars on her face. A plasma rifle burst had left 3 parallel lines across her left cheek, marks that no amount of cosmetic surgery could completely erase. Luna Station was chaos. Thousands of people moved through the massive spaceport, heading to different destinations across the solar system. Sarah had been here before, but that was when she was 18 and eager to serve humanity in the war effort. Now she just wanted to disappear into the crowd. She made her way to the Earth Shuttle terminal, showing her discharge papers to the security checkpoint. The guard, a young man probably her age, looked at her military record on his scanner and his eyes widened. "Captain Chen? The Captain Chen who held Outpost 7 for 3 days against a full Zeltharan assault?" he asked in amazement. Sarah just nodded, not wanting to talk about it. That battle had cost her 43 good soldiers and nearly her sanity. The newspapers called it a heroic last stand, but all Sarah remembered was watching her friends die while she tried desperately to call for reinforcements that never came. "Thank you for your service, ma'am. Have a safe trip home," the guard said, stepping aside with obvious respect. The shuttle ride to Earth took 6 hours. Sarah spent most of it staring out the window, watching the planet's surface come into view. She had grown up in New Vancouver, on the North American continent's west coast. The city looked different from space, bigger and more sprawling than she remembered. When the shuttle landed at New Vancouver Spaceport, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sounds and smells of civilian life. No weapon fire, no burning metal, no screams of wounded soldiers. Just normal people going about their normal lives, completely unaware that a war was still raging in the outer systems. Sarah's parents had died in a hover car accident while she was deployed to the Rigel sector. She had no siblings, no close relatives, and most of her friends from before the war had moved on with their lives. The government provided housing assistance for veterans, but Sarah wanted to do something meaningful with the rest of her life. She had always been good at math and science even as a child. During quiet moments between battles, she had studied through distance learning programs, earning degrees in engineering and education. Now she wanted to teach, to help shape young minds instead of ending lives. The application process for the teaching certification program was surprisingly simple. Sarah's military experience and educational background made her an attractive candidate. Within 2 weeks, she received acceptance to the accelerated program at Terra Nova Academy, one of Earth's most prestigious educational institutions. Terra Nova Academy was located in the Swiss Alps, built into a mountainside with stunning views of snow-capped peaks. The academy served children from ages 12 to 18, mostly the sons and daughters of wealthy families, diplomats, and government officials. Sarah would be teaching advanced physics and military history to students who had never experienced real hardship. On her first day, Sarah stood outside the academy's main entrance, looking up at the massive stone and metal structure. It reminded her of a fortress, with high walls and narrow windows. The architect had probably intended it to look impressive and secure. but to Sarah's experienced eye, it looked like a prison. The headmaster, Dr. Marcus Webb, greeted her in his office. He was a thin man in his 60s with gray hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office was filled with books and academic awards, a stark contrast to the military briefing rooms Sarah was used to. "Welcome to Terra Nova Academy, Ms. Chen," Dr. Webb said, shaking her hand. "I must say, your background is quite unique for a teacher. 8 years of military service, multiple decorations for valor, and degrees in both engineering and education. Quite impressive." Sarah nodded politely. "I'm looking forward to working with the students, sir. I believe young people deserve to understand both the scientific principles that govern our universe and the historical events that shaped our civilization." Dr. Webb smiled. "Excellent attitude. However, I should warn you that our students come from very privileged backgrounds. They may not immediately appreciate the practical perspective you bring to education. Some of them can be quite challenging." That was an understatement, as Sarah would soon discover. Her first class was advanced physics with 17-year-old students. As she entered the classroom, she saw 12 teenagers sitting at their desks, most of them looking bored or distracted. They were well-dressed and clearly from wealthy families, but something about their demeanor struck her as odd. "Good morning, class. I'm Ms. Chen, your new physics teacher," Sarah said, standing at the front of the room with military precision. A boy in the back row, who looked like he spent more time at the gym than studying, raised his hand. "Miss Chen, is it true you killed people in the war?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah had expected this kind of curiosity, but the way the student asked it made her uncomfortable. There was something hungry in his eyes, something that reminded her of the look Zeltharan soldiers had right before they tried to kill her. "War is a complex subject." "Marcus," Sarah said, reading his name from the class roster. "Today we're going to discuss the physics of space travel. Can anyone tell me what happens to matter when it approaches the speed of light?" A girl named Elena raised her hand. She had pale skin and dark hair, and unlike the others, she seemed genuinely interested in learning. "According to Einstein's theory of relativity, mass approaches infinity as velocity approaches the speed of light, making faster-than-light travel theoretically impossible." "Excellent, Elena." "That's exactly right," Sarah said, feeling hopeful that at least one student was engaged. "However, humanity has developed ways around this limitation using quantum folding technology and subspace manipulation." As the class continued, Sarah noticed that most students were paying attention, but not in the way she expected. Instead of focusing on the scientific concepts, they seemed more interested in watching her reactions, studying her behavior like predators sizing up prey. During lunch break, Sarah ate alone in the faculty dining room. The other teachers were polite but distant, clearly unsure how to interact with someone who had spent nearly a decade in combat. Sarah was used to being an outsider, but something about Terra Nova Academy felt different from other places she had been. After lunch, she taught military history to a group of 15-year-olds. This class was even stranger than the physics class. When Sarah began discussing the causes of the Outer Ring Wars, the students asked detailed questions about combat tactics, weapon effectiveness, and casualty rates. Their questions were too sophisticated for teenagers, and their interest seemed almost clinical. "Ms. Chen," asked a student named David, "what was the most efficient way to eliminate Zeltharan soldiers during close-quarters combat?" Sarah paused, studying the boy's face. He couldn't have been more than 16, but his eyes held an intensity that reminded her of veteran soldiers. "David, military history is about understanding the causes and consequences of conflict, not learning specific combat techniques." "But you must have learned effective killing methods during your service," pressed another student, a girl named Victoria. "Surely that knowledge would be valuable for our education." The way Victoria said the word killing made Sarah's skin crawl. There was anticipation in her voice, almost excitement. Sarah had heard that tone before, from soldiers who enjoyed combat a little too much. But these were children from wealthy families, not hardened warriors. "Violence should always be a last resort," Sarah said firmly. "The goal of studying military history is to learn from past mistakes and hopefully prevent future conflicts." The students exchanged glances, and Sarah caught something that looked like disappointment in their expressions. The rest of the class proceeded normally, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. That evening, Sarah explored the academy grounds. The building was indeed impressive, with state-of-the-art laboratories, libraries, and recreational facilities. The dormitories where students lived were luxurious by any standard, more like a high-end hotel than a school. As she walked through the corridors, Sarah noticed security cameras everywhere. That wasn't unusual for an expensive private school, but the density of surveillance equipment seemed excessive. She also observed that all the windows had reinforced glass and electronic locks, and every door required keycard access. Sarah's quarters were located in the faculty wing, a small but comfortable apartment with a bedroom, bathroom, and sitting area. The furniture was expensive and tasteful, but the room felt sterile and impersonal. She unpacked her few belongings and tried to settle in for her first night. Around midnight, Sarah was awakened by sounds in the corridor outside her room. She heard footsteps and muffled voices, which was odd since students were supposed to be in their dormitories after 10 p.m. Her military training kicked in automatically, and she moved quietly to her door to listen. The voices were speaking in whispers, but Sarah's enhanced hearing, a side effect of her cybernetic implants, allowed her to make out some words. They were discussing someone called the new teacher and mentioning something about assessment and potential. Sarah carefully opened her door a crack and peered into the hallway. 3 figures in dark clothing were standing near the elevator, their faces hidden by hoods. They didn't look like students or faculty members. After a few minutes, they entered the elevator and disappeared. The next morning, Sarah asked Dr. Webb about the security protocols during their scheduled meeting. "Dr. Webb, I noticed quite a bit of security equipment around the academy. Are there specific threats we should be aware of?" she asked. Dr. Webb's expression became guarded. "Ms. Chen, Terra Nova Academy serves the children of some very important people, politicians, business leaders, diplomats. We take security very seriously to ensure our students' safety." "I understand that, but last night I heard people moving through the corridors after hours. Is that normal?" "Sometimes we have maintenance staff working late, or security personnel conducting their rounds." "I wouldn't worry about it," Dr. Webb said, but his tone suggested the conversation was over. Sarah wasn't satisfied with that explanation, but she decided not to push the issue. She had learned during her military service to observe and gather information before taking action. Over the next few days, Sarah noticed more strange behavior from her students. They were all highly intelligent and well-educated, but their interests seemed to focus on topics related to violence and conflict. During physics class, they asked about the destructive potential of various energy weapons. In military history, they wanted detailed information about torture techniques and psychological warfare. Most disturbing was their reaction to Sarah's war stories. When she reluctantly shared some of her experiences, the students listened with an intensity that was almost hunger. They asked follow-up questions about the emotional impact of killing, the physical sensations of combat, and the psychological effects of witnessing death. Elena, the girl who had answered the physics question correctly on the first day, approached Sarah after class one afternoon. "Ms. Chen, can I ask you something personal?" Elena said, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "Of course, Elena. What's on your mind?" "How did you sleep after your first kill?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah stared at the girl, shocked by the directness of the question. "Elena, that's not an appropriate topic for a student-teacher conversation." Please, Miss Chen, I really need to know, how did it feel? Were you scared? Excited? Did you feel powerful? The questions came rapid fire, and Sarah could see genuine desperation in Elena's eyes. This wasn't academic curiosity or teenage rebellion. Something was seriously wrong with this girl, and possibly with all the students at Terra Nova Academy. Elena, I think you should speak with the school counselor about these thoughts, Sarah said gently. It's not healthy for someone your age to be so focused on violence. Elena's expression changed instantly, becoming cold and distant. Never mind, Ms. Chen. Forget I asked. The girl walked away quickly, leaving Sarah standing in the empty classroom with a growing sense of unease. Something was very wrong at Terra Nova Academy, and Sarah was beginning to suspect that she hadn't escaped the war after all. She had simply found a different kind of battlefield, one where the enemies wore the faces of children and the rules of engagement were completely unknown. That night, Sarah decided to conduct some reconnaissance of her own. She had spent 8 years gathering intelligence in hostile territory, and those skills were about to prove useful in a place she had thought would be safe. Sarah waited until 2 a.m. before beginning her investigation. She had changed into dark clothing and soft-soled shoes, moving through the academy corridors with the silent precision learned during countless covert operations. Her cybernetic arm gave her enhanced strength and coordination, while her military-grade neural implants provided superior night vision and hearing. The academy's layout was more complex than it appeared during the day. Sarah discovered several corridors and rooms that weren't marked on the official building plans displayed in the main lobby. Using her technical background, she accessed maintenance panels and found blueprints that showed the true structure of Terra Nova Academy. The building extended much deeper into the mountainside than anyone would guess from the surface. There were at least 3 underground levels not shown on any public documentation. Sarah made mental notes of security camera locations and guard patrol patterns, skills that had kept her alive during reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines. On the 2nd floor, she found something that made her blood run cold. In a room marked Student Records, she discovered files that contained far more than typical academic information. Each student's folder included psychological profiles, genetic analyses, and something called compatibility assessments, with numerical ratings. Elena's file was particularly disturbing. According to the documents, she scored in the 97th percentile for something called adaptation potential and showed exceptional promise for advanced integration procedures. The file contained brain scans, blood work results, and behavioral observations that read more like military intelligence reports than school records. Sarah photographed several files with her implant's built-in camera, then carefully returned everything to its original position. She was about to leave when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Moving quickly, she hid behind a filing cabinet just as the door opened. 2 figures entered the room. In the dim light, Sarah could see they were wearing the same hooded clothing she had observed the previous night. They moved to a specific filing cabinet and began removing folders. "Subject 47 is showing excellent progress," one of them said in a low voice. "Dr. Vance believes she'll be ready for the next phase within the month." "What about the new teacher?" "Her presence is creating variables we didn't account for," replied the second figure. "The director is handling that situation. Chen's military background makes her valuable but also dangerous. We need to determine whether she can be controlled or if she requires elimination." Sarah's training took over, suppressing her shock and fear to focus on gathering information. These people were discussing her as if she were a test subject or target, and they had mentioned something about subjects and phases that sounded disturbingly like human experimentation. The figures finished their work and left, but not before Sarah heard one of them mention a meeting in Lab 7 the following night. She waited several minutes before emerging from her hiding spot, then continued her investigation with even greater caution. The basement levels required more careful navigation. Sarah discovered that her faculty keycard didn't work on the lower-level doors, but her cybernetic arm's enhanced capabilities allowed her to bypass the electronic locks. The first basement level contained what appeared to be normal storage rooms and mechanical equipment, but the second basement was something else entirely. The corridor walls were lined with reinforced steel instead of the decorative stone used in the upper levels. The lighting was harsh and clinical, and the air had a chemical smell that reminded Sarah of military medical facilities. Through a small window in one door, she saw what looked like a laboratory with sophisticated equipment and monitoring devices. In another room, she discovered something that made her question everything she thought she knew about Terra Nova Academy. Behind thick glass walls, she saw what appeared to be holding cells, each one equipped with restraints and monitoring equipment. Most were empty, but one contained a figure huddled in the corner. Sarah tried to get closer, but her enhanced hearing picked up the sound of approaching footsteps. She retreated quickly, making her way back to the upper levels through service corridors. By the time she reached her quarters, she was shaking with a combination of adrenaline and horror. The next day, Sarah struggled to act normally during her classes. Every time she looked at her students, she wondered what was really happening to them. Elena seemed particularly subdued, avoiding eye contact and participating less than usual in class discussions. During lunch, Sarah approached Dr. Webb with a carefully prepared question. "Dr. Webb, I've noticed that several of my students seem to be under considerable stress. Is there additional counseling support available for them?" Dr. Webb studied her carefully before responding. "Ms. Chen, I appreciate your concern for the students' welfare. However, Terra Nova Academy has very specialized programs designed to help these young people reach their full potential. Sometimes that process can be challenging." "What kind of specialized programs?" Sarah asked. "Our students come here because they have unique abilities and characteristics that require careful development. We work closely with government agencies and private organizations to ensure these young people become productive members of society." The way Dr. Webb emphasized certain words made Sarah's skin crawl. She had heard similar language used to describe military recruitment and psychological conditioning programs, but these were children, not volunteer soldiers. That afternoon, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. While teaching physics, she noticed that Marcus, the athletic boy who had asked about killing on her first day, had what looked like injection marks on his neck. When she got closer to help him with a problem, she could see that the marks were fresh, probably made within the last day or two. During a break between classes, Sarah discreetly examined other students and found similar marks on several of them. Whatever was being injected, it was happening regularly and to multiple students. The marks were in locations that would normally be hidden by clothing or hair, suggesting deliberate concealment. Sarah's military medical training helped her recognize the injection patterns. They were consistent with regular pharmaceutical treatments, possibly involving drugs that needed to be administered frequently to maintain effectiveness. The location and spacing of the marks suggested someone with professional medical knowledge was performing the injections. That evening, Sarah prepared for what might be her most dangerous reconnaissance mission since leaving the military. She needed to find Lab 7 and discover what was really happening to the students. But first, she had to ensure she had an escape plan if things went wrong. Using her technical skills, Sarah accessed the Academy's communication systems and discovered that all outgoing messages were monitored and filtered. She couldn't simply call for help or contact authorities without alerting whoever was running the operation. Instead, she prepared a data packet containing everything she had discovered and programmed it to be automatically transmitted if she didn't check in every 24 hours. At midnight, Sarah began her infiltration of the lower levels. This time, she was prepared for potential confrontation. Her cybernetic arm contained several concealed tools and weapons that hadn't been detected by the Academy's security scans, and her military training had taught her dozens of ways to neutralize threats without conventional weapons. Lab 7 was located on the lowest level Sarah had discovered, behind multiple security doors and surveillance systems. Using skills learned during covert operations against the Zeltharan Empire, she disabled cameras and bypassed locks while leaving no evidence of her presence. What she found in Lab 7 was worse than anything she had imagined. The laboratory contained dozens of monitoring stations, each one displaying real-time biological data from different subjects. Sarah recognized some of the names from her class rosters. Elena's vital signs were being monitored, along with brain activity patterns and something called neural integration progress. The laboratory equipment was far beyond anything a school would need for educational purposes. Sarah saw devices for genetic manipulation, neural interface technology, and chemical synthesis equipment that could produce military-grade pharmaceuticals. This wasn't a school at all. It was a research facility using children as test subjects. On a computer terminal, Sarah found files that revealed the true purpose of Terra Nova Academy. The facility was run by a joint government corporate program called Project Renaissance, designed to create enhanced humans with specific psychological and physical modifications. The students weren't students at all. They were subjects in an experiment to produce perfect soldiers, spies, and operatives. The files contained detailed information about each subject's genetic markers, psychological profiles, and enhancement procedures. Elena had been selected for her high intelligence and lack of family connections. Marcus was being enhanced for physical capabilities and aggression control. All of them were being systematically modified to become weapons for whoever was funding the project. Sarah discovered that she hadn't been hired as a teacher by accident. Her military background and technical expertise had made her a target for recruitment or elimination. The program directors wanted to either convert her into an asset or ensure she couldn't expose their operation. As she read deeper into the files, Sarah learned that several previous teachers had disappeared after asking too many questions. Some had been found dead in apparent accidents, while others had simply vanished. Terra Nova Academy had a very effective way of dealing with potential threats. A sound from the corridor outside made Sarah freeze. Someone was approaching the laboratory, and she could hear multiple voices discussing the Chen situation. She had been discovered, either through surveillance she had missed or by someone who had noticed her absence from her quarters. Sarah quickly copied critical files to her implant's storage system, then moved toward the laboratory's emergency exit. But as she reached the door, she found it blocked by 3 figures in the same hooded clothing she had observed before. Behind her, more people entered through the main door, trapping her in the laboratory. "Captain Sarah Chen," said a voice from behind her. "Please turn around slowly and keep your hands where we can see them." Sarah complied, recognizing the voice as Dr. Webb's, though his tone was completely different from their previous conversations. When she faced him, she saw that he was no longer the mild-mannered academic she had met. His posture was military, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "Dr. Webb, I presume that's not your real name," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady despite the danger. "Colonel Michael Harrison, formerly of Military Intelligence Division," he replied. "And you've just discovered information that could compromise a program vital to humanity's survival." "Vital to humanity's survival? You're experimenting on children," Sarah said, her anger overriding her caution. "We're creating the next generation of human defenders," Harrison replied coldly. "The Zeltharan Empire isn't the only threat humanity faces. There are worse things coming, and we need enhanced humans to protect our species." Around the laboratory, Sarah could see other figures removing their hoods. She recognized several of them as Academy staff members, including teachers and administrators she had considered colleagues. All of them were looking at her with the same cold assessment she had seen in military briefings before dangerous missions. "You have two choices, Captain Chen," Harrison continued. "You can join our program voluntarily and help us train the next generation of enhanced operatives. Your combat experience and technical knowledge would be valuable additions to our staff." "And if I refuse?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then you become a liability that must be eliminated for the security of the program," Harrison said matter-of-factly. "We can't allow you to expose Project Renaissance to the outside world." Sarah looked around the laboratory, calculating distances and assessing threats. She was outnumbered at least 6-1, trapped in a confined space with limited escape routes. But she had survived impossible odds before, and she wasn't about to let these people continue torturing children in the name of human enhancement. "I need time to consider your offer," Sarah said, buying herself a few crucial seconds while she prepared for action. "I'm afraid we need an answer now, Captain," Harrison replied. "Too much is at stake to allow delays." Sarah's response was swift and decisive. Her cybernetic arm moved faster than human reflexes could follow, striking the nearest guard and taking his weapon in one fluid motion. She rolled behind a laboratory table, using it for cover while assessing her tactical situation. "Disappointing." "Captain Chen," Harrison called out as his people took positions around the laboratory. "You always were too idealistic for intelligence work. That's why you ended up in frontline combat instead of advancing through the ranks." Weapon fire erupted in the laboratory as Sarah began the most important battle of her military career. This time, she wasn't fighting to capture territory or defend strategic positions. She was fighting to save children from becoming weapons in someone else's war. The real nightmare was just beginning. The laboratory erupted into chaos as energy bolts scorched the air around Sarah's position. Her military training kicked in automatically, years of combat experience guiding her movements as she rolled between cover points and returned fire with deadly precision. The guards were well trained, but they hadn't spent 8 years fighting an alien empire that used advanced tactics and superior technology. Sarah's cybernetic arm gave her several advantages in the firefight. Its enhanced strength allowed her to lift heavy equipment for cover, while integrated targeting systems helped her place shots with lethal accuracy. Within the first 30 seconds, she had neutralized 2 guards and forced the others to take defensive positions. "Contain the situation!" Harrison shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "We cannot allow her to escape or damage critical equipment." But Sarah wasn't trying to escape. She was fighting to reach the laboratory's central computer system, where she could access communication equipment and alert authorities to what was happening at Terra Nova Academy. Every second counted because she knew that Harrison's people would be calling for reinforcements. Using smoke grenades taken from a fallen guard, Sarah created a visual barrier and moved toward the computer terminals. Her enhanced hearing allowed her to track enemy positions by sound, while her cybernetic arm's integrated tools gave her rapid access to electronic systems. As she worked to hack into the communication network, Sarah heard something that made her blood run cold. Alarms were sounding throughout the facility, but not just security alarms. She could hear what sounded like distress calls from the student dormitories. "What's happening to the students?" Sarah demanded, keeping her weapon trained on Harrison while her other hand worked at the computer terminal. "Emergency protocols, Captain," Harrison replied coldly. "If Project Renaissance is compromised, we cannot allow the test subjects to fall into the wrong hands. They know too much about our procedures." Sarah realized with horror that Harrison was talking about eliminating the students to prevent exposure of the program. These people were prepared to murder children to protect their secret experiments. The true scope of their evil was becoming clear, and Sarah felt a familiar rage building inside her. The same fury that had carried her through the bloodiest battles of the Outer Ring Wars. "You're talking about killing kids," Sarah snarled, her finger tightening on the weapon's trigger. "We're talking about protecting humanity's future from those who would destroy it," Harrison replied. "These children were selected because they have no families to miss them, no connections to the outside world. Their sacrifice will enable us to create enhanced humans capable of defending our species." The coldness in Harrison's voice reminded Sarah of the worst Zeltharan commanders she had faced. Aliens who saw other lives as disposable resources in their conquest of human space. But this was worse, because Harrison was human, and he was targeting humanity's own children. Sarah's hack succeeded in accessing the Academy's communication systems, but what she found was even more disturbing than she had expected. Project Renaissance wasn't limited to Terra Nova Academy. The program operated similar facilities on 12 different worlds, with hundreds of children being subjected to enhancement experiments across human space. The files revealed that the program was funded by a consortium of government agencies and corporate interests, all convinced that enhanced humans were necessary for humanity's survival in an increasingly dangerous galaxy. They had been operating for over 20 years, producing enhanced operatives who were placed in military, intelligence, and corporate positions throughout human civilization. "My God," Sarah whispered as she read the scope of the operation. "You've been doing this for decades." "Captain Chen, you're looking at the future of human evolution," Harrison said, moving closer to her position. "The Zeltharan Empire was just the beginning. Our intelligence indicates that there are other threats emerging from deep space, entities that make the Zeltharans look like primitive barbarians. Ordinary humans cannot hope to survive what's coming." "So you decided to play God with children's lives," Sarah replied, uploading data to her emergency transmission system. "You turned kids into weapons without their consent." "We're creating soldiers capable of protecting our species," Harrison countered. "Every enhanced operative we produce saves thousands of ordinary human lives in future conflicts." Sarah had heard similar justifications during the war from commanders who ordered questionable missions in the name of victory. But this went far beyond military necessity. This was systematic abuse of the most vulnerable members of society, justified by fear and paranoia. The sound of approaching reinforcements echoed through the corridors outside the laboratory. Sarah knew she had only minutes before being overwhelmed by superior numbers, but she wasn't finished with her mission. The data upload was complete, but she still needed to ensure the students' immediate safety. Using her cybernetic arm's enhanced capabilities, Sarah accessed the facility's emergency systems and began shutting down the enhancement procedures. Alarms screamed throughout the building as life support systems switched to backup power and containment fields failed in the lower levels. "What are you doing?" Harrison demanded, realizing that Sarah was systematically destroying his operation. "Saving those kids," Sarah replied grimly. "Something I should have done the moment I realized what this place really was." She triggered the Academy's fire suppression systems, filling corridors with flame-retardant foam that would slow pursuing guards while providing cover for escaping students. Then she activated the emergency evacuation protocols, opening all security doors and disabling containment systems throughout the facility. The laboratory doors burst open as Harrison's reinforcements arrived, but they found themselves fighting in a building that was rapidly becoming uninhabitable. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as Sarah moved through the chaos, using her military skills to evade capture while ensuring that students could escape their dormitories. In the corridor outside Lab 7, Sarah encountered Elena and several other students who were trying to flee the building. The girl looked confused and frightened, clearly suffering from whatever drugs had been used on her. But she was mobile and conscious. "Miss Chen!" Elena called out when she saw her teacher. "What's happening? Why are there alarms everywhere?" "Elena, listen to me carefully," Sarah said, taking the girl's hand. "This place isn't a school. The people running it have been hurting you and the other students. We need to get everyone out of here right now." Elena's eyes widened with understanding, and Sarah realized that some part of the girl had always known something was wrong. "I knew it," Elena whispered. "I knew they were doing things to us. The injections, the tests, the way they looked at us like we were experiments." "You're not experiments. You're human beings," Sarah said firmly, "and I'm going to make sure you stay that way." Together, Sarah and Elena gathered other escaping students and began moving toward the main exits. But their path was blocked by guards who were trying to prevent anyone from leaving the facility. Sarah found herself fighting a running battle through corridors filled with frightened teenagers, using every tactical skill she possessed to protect the people she had come to save. The students proved to be more capable than Sarah had expected. Whatever enhancements had been performed on them had improved their physical abilities and reflexes. Marcus, the athletic boy from her first class, moved with superhuman speed and strength. Elena displayed enhanced intelligence and tactical thinking that rivaled trained soldiers. "They made us into weapons," Elena said, as they fought their way toward the exit. "But they never considered that we might use those abilities to fight back." Sarah felt a surge of pride watching these young people stand up to their tormentors. Despite everything that had been done to them, they had retained their humanity and their capacity for moral choice. They were choosing to resist rather than accept their roles as enhanced operatives. The main exit was heavily guarded, but Sarah had one more trick available. Her emergency data transmission had included a distress signal to military authorities, and her former unit was still monitoring those frequencies. As they reached the Academy's main lobby, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of military transport ships approaching from outside. "This is Colonel Martinez, 47th Special Operations Regiment," a familiar voice announced over the Academy's communication system. "Terra Nova Academy is now under military occupation. All personnel will surrender immediately and submit to interrogation." Sarah smiled grimly. Colonel Martinez had been her commanding officer during the final years of the Outer Ring Wars, and she knew he would respond decisively to evidence of crimes against humanity. The 47th Special Operations Regiment specialized in exactly this type of hostage rescue and facility seizure. Harrison and his people found themselves trapped between Sarah's group inside the building and military forces outside. The enhanced students, no longer willing to be passive victims, helped Sarah coordinate with the incoming troops to secure the facility and capture the program's leadership. Over the following days, the true scope of Project Renaissance was revealed to the public. Sarah's data transmission had reached not only military authorities, but also journalists and human rights organizations. The scandal exploded across human space, leading to investigations and arrests at the highest levels of government and corporate leadership. The enhanced students faced an uncertain future. Medical teams worked to reverse as many of the modifications as possible, but some changes were permanent. However, instead of being treated as experiments or weapons, they were recognized as victims who deserved support and rehabilitation. Elena proved particularly resilient, using her enhanced intelligence to help investigators understand the full extent of the program's activities. "Ms. Chen showed us that having enhanced abilities doesn't mean we have to be weapons," she told reporters. "We can choose to use our capabilities to help people instead of hurting them." Sarah testified before congressional committees and military tribunals, ensuring that everyone responsible for Project Renaissance faced justice. Her actions at Terra Nova Academy led to the exposure and shutdown of similar facilities across human space, freeing hundreds of children from experimental programs. The scandal also led to new laws protecting human genetic integrity and establishing strict oversight of enhancement research. Sarah helped draft legislation ensuring that any future enhancement programs would be voluntary, transparent, and subject to rigorous ethical review. But the most important outcome, from Sarah's perspective, was the establishment of the Enhanced Human Integration Program. designed to help survivors of illegal experimentation rebuild their lives. Sarah was appointed as the program's director, finally finding a way to use her military experience for healing rather than warfare. Years later, Sarah stood in the main auditorium of the New Geneva Educational Center, watching Elena give a presentation to visiting scientists about ethical enhancement research. The young woman had grown into a brilliant researcher, using her enhanced abilities to advance legitimate medical science, while ensuring that future generations would never face what she had endured. "You know," Elena said after her presentation, approaching Sarah with a smile, "I never did thank you properly for saving us from that place." "You don't need to thank me," Sarah replied. "You and the others saved yourselves. I just helped clear the path." "You did more than that," Elena said seriously. "You showed us that being enhanced doesn't mean being inhuman. You taught us that our choices define who we are, not our abilities or what others did to us." Sarah looked around the auditorium, where several other Terra Nova survivors were working as researchers, teachers, and advocates for human rights. They had turned their traumatic experiences into motivation for positive change, ensuring that no other children would suffer as they had. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't decided to become a teacher," Sarah mused. Elena smiled. "You would have found another way to fight for what's right. That's who you are, Ms. Chen. You're someone who protects people, whether it's from alien invasions or from other humans who forget what it means to be human." Sarah nodded, feeling at peace with her choices for the first time since leaving the military. She had discovered that leaving the battlefield didn't mean the war was over. Sometimes the most important battles were fought in classrooms and laboratories, where the future of humanity was shaped one young mind at a time. The enhanced students had learned that their modifications didn't define them, their choices did. And Sarah had learned that being a warrior didn't always require weapons. Sometimes the greatest victory was simply refusing to let evil people destroy innocence and hope. As the sun set over the Swiss Alps, painting the mountains in shades of gold and red, Sarah Chen finally felt like she had truly come home from the war. Not to a place, but to a purpose that honored both her past as a soldier and her future as a protector of humanity's most precious resource, its children.